Today we're going to talk about compound inequalities. And compound inequalities are two inequalities or more joined together with and or. Okay, so we're going to focus on the or ones first. So our or inequalities have a tendency to graph apart. Okay, so you're going to have two inequalities on the same number line here, and they're going to be graphed apart from each other. Okay, so for example, our first one we have x is less than or equal to -2, or x is greater than 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to graph each one of these inequalities on this number line. Because of the or, they shouldn't be touching. So I'm going to start with x is less than or equal to -2. So that means since it's got this underline here, I have a closed circle on -2. These should all be negative. There we go. Okay, a closed circle on -2. And then I am going and drawing my line and shading to the left because the sign is not eating the variable. Okay, and we are shading towards that negative infinity. Or x is greater than 3. So this sign is telling me that it's an open circle on 3, and I am shading to the right because the sign is eating the variable. Right, so this is what a compound inequality with or would look like. You'd have two separate dots, and they'd both be going different directions. Okay, so if it's an or, you should have them shaded different directions. There should be a gap in the middle. So our interval notation would look like this. We have our negative infinity on this side. We have our positive infinity over here. So for our interval notation, I've got negative infinity. I've got a -2. And remember, with infinities, even positive or negative, it's always a parentheses. And since this is a closed dot, it's a bracket. And then I'm going to put the word or. And then I've got 3, comma, infinity. And again, infinity is always parentheses. This is an open circle, so it's also a parenthesis. Right. So number 1, let's try that. So now we have to actually solve it, which we've already practiced, so we should be good. For number 1, you want to add 4 to both sides. So I'm adding 4 to this, and I get a -3. Sign stays the same. Over here, we're multiplying by 2, so to get rid of that, I got to divide by 2. Since it's positive, the sign stays the same. So my answer here is x is less than -3, or x is greater than or equal to 6. So I'm going to go ahead and graph that. So I've got my -3. So I need an open circle on -3. And it's not eating the variable, so we're going to the left. And then we have x is greater than or equal to 6. So we have a closed circle on 6, because we are including 6. And then we shade to the right because it is eating that variable. And again, our interval notation. All right, so I've got negative infinity and infinity over here. So I've got negative infinity, comma, -3. Or I've got 6, comma, infinity. And again, infinities always have parentheses. This is an open circle, so it's a parenthesis. This is a closed circle, so it's a bracket. All right, so pause the video, try number 2. All right, so for number 2, we're going to go ahead and solve. We are dividing by a negative here, so that means we are flipping that sign. So I have x is greater than or equal to a +3, or we're going to subtract 5 from both sides here to get x is less than 1. So we have x is less than 1. We're going to write the smaller number 1 first, or x is greater than or equal to 3. So then go ahead and graph it. We have our +1 right here, and that's an open circle. And then since the sign is not eating that variable to the left, over here the sign is eating the variable, it's a closed circle on 3 to the right. So I've got negative infinity, infinity. So I've got negative infinity, comma, 1, or 3, comma, infinity. And infinities are parentheses, This is an open circle, so it is a parenthesis. This is a closed circle, so it is a bracket. All right, number 3. We're going to go ahead and solve this. It is a 2-step one. So you want to go ahead and just use those 2 steps. So try and solve it, graph it, and figure out that notation. All right, so if you've went ahead and paused this and solved it, you should see that we are subtracting 9 here first. So we have 2x is greater than 8, and then divide by 2 to get x is greater than 4. And then on the other side, we're going to go ahead and subtract 10 from both sides. So I have 5x is less than 0, divide both sides by 5, x is less than 0. So again, writing the smaller one first, x is less than 0, or x is greater than 4. And then when we graph that, we're going to go ahead and put our open circle on 0, and then shade to the left, open circle on 4, and shade to the right. For our interval notation, we have our negative infinity, comma 0, or 4, comma infinity. And then again, infinities are always parentheses, and these are both open circles, so it's also parentheses. All right, so again, try number 4, pause the video, and then press play when you're ready. For number 4, we're going to add 14 to both sides first. So we have 7x is greater than or equal to 14. Divide by 7, and x is greater than or equal to 2. Over here, subtract 5 from both sides. So we're going to go ahead and get a negative 8 over here. We're dividing by a positive 4, so the sign stays the same. And that'll get us a negative 2. So our answer, we're going to write our negative 1 first. X is less than or equal to negative 2, or x is greater than or equal to 2. Okay, so this is our answers. We're going to go ahead and graph this. So I have a closed circle right here on negative 2. And it is not eating that variable, so it is to the left. Here I have a closed circle on positive 2. And it is eating the variable, so it is to the right. And we're going to go ahead and write our interval notation. So I've got negative infinity, comma, a negative 2. Okay, that's parenthesis. This one's a bracket because it's a closed circle. Or 2, comma, infinity, closed, so it's a bracket. Infinity, always parentheses. All right, so number 5, you're going to go ahead and solve this by distributing first. So we're going to distribute our negative 3 to both parts. So we have a negative 6x minus 3 is less than negative 15. Add 3 to both sides. We are dividing by a negative here, so our sign is going to flip. Okay, divide by negative 6. We get x is greater than 2. Over here, we're going to go ahead and subtract 1. So I have a negative x is greater than or equal to 4. Again, a negative, we're dividing by a negative 1. So we're flipping that sign. And we have x is less than or equal to negative 4. Write the smaller one first. X is less than or equal to negative 4. Or, because it says or at the top, x is greater than 2. So closed circle, because it's underlined here on negative 4. Not eating that variable, so to the left. Okay, and then 2, open circle, because there is no line. It is eating that, so we go to the right. Interval notation, negative infinity, comma, negative 4, or 2, comma, infinity. Infinities are always parentheses. This is a closed circle, so it's a bracket. This is an open circle, so it's a parenthesis. All right, so that's how you solve ones with or. But now we have some with and as well. Okay, so what happens if you have and? And inequalities have a tendency to graph together. All right, so our example is x is greater than or equal to negative 6 and x is less than or equal to 1. So in this case, we're not going to have 2 separate graphs. We're going to have just one graph and it's going to connect. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you what this would look like if you graph them as 2 different inequalities on one graph. But then I want to show you what the final answer actually looks like. So I'm going to use multiple colors here So just bear with me. So first I'm going to graph x is greater than or equal to -6. I'm going to use green. And I'm going to start at my -6, which these negative signs would show up. So -6, put our closed circle on -6. And then we want everything to the right because it's eating that variable. Okay, so we're going that way. And then we also have x is less than or equal to 1. Okay, let me use purple. So x is less than or equal to 1. So I'm going to start at 1 right here, put my closed circle because it is including that. And then I'm going to graph, since it's not eating it, we go to the left. Okay, so here's the part that's the tricky part, which it's not really super tricky. You see where these colors are overlapping here? This is the only part I'm actually including on this graph. So this arrow over here is going to get erased, and that part of the arrow over there is going to get erased because we do not want to include that in our answer. So I'm going to go ahead and erase as much as I can without erasing the dot. There. So your actual answer to this problem, there we go, would look like this. So we have our closed circle on 6, our closed circle on 1, and we are just shading in between these two pieces. Okay, so that's what your AND graph is going to look like. It's just two circles and a line connecting them. We don't want to include anything that is not part of both inequalities, okay? So because the solutions to an AND inequality fall between two endpoints, they're frequently written in a more condensed form. So you don't want to write it separately like this. You're actually going to write them more condensed. So our example, we're going to use the same one we just did. X is greater than or equal to -6, and x is less than or equal to 1. That's actually going to become -6, because that's the least part right here. Oh, I forgot interval notation. -6, comma 1. Okay, because it includes both and there's nothing else, etc. On the outside. So -6 is less than or equal to x, so that's the middle part, okay, which is also less than or equal to 1. So if you're seeing an AND inequality, you're probably going to see it written like this. Just so you are aware, this means and because there's only the one x, and it's x is in between this and this, but it can also include those two parts. All right, so we're going to go ahead and solve AND inequalities. So there's two ways you can solve this. Whatever works easier for you is what I want you to do. You can break this apart into two separate AND inequalities, two separate ones, and then solve it and then recombine it. Or if you can make sure you're keeping everything balanced, you can just solve it as is. I'm going to solve it as is, but I'm talking about if you separate it, you would have like 2 is less than or equal to x plus 4 as one, and then x plus 4 is less than 9 as the other, and you would solve this and then you can combine it. Or what we're going to do is we're trying to eliminate the stuff in the middle. So whatever I do to the middle, I've got to do to both sides here, treat it as two separate things. So I'm going to subtract 4 from this to get this x by itself. That's the goal, which means I'm going to subtract 4 here, and I'm going to subtract 4 here. Okay, so I have x in the middle now. I'm going to keep the sign the same. 2 minus 4, that's going to get me a -2. 9 minus 4, that's going to get me a 5. So now I can go ahead and graph this. I have my closed circle on -2, and I have an open circle on 5, and then I'm just going to draw my line between the two dots. Okay, so this sign applies to this sign applies to that. Okay, so number 7, same idea. I'm going to add 13 to all parts of this. We're solving it just like we would a normal inequality or a normal equation. It just looks differently. Okay, so add 13 to every part. I'm going to have a -14 here. Less than 7x is less than 21. And now I can go ahead and divide each part by 7. So divide by 7, divide by 7, divide by 7. Since it's a positive 7, I keep the sign the same. So I have -2 is less than x, which is less than 3. And that is my answer to this one. So when I go ahead and graph it, oh, I forgot interval notation again. This is -2, comma, 5 parentheses. Okay, So I'm going to go ahead and graph this. -2, close circle, or open circle because it is a less than, and then an open circle on 3. Draw my line in between. So now for interval notation, I'm going to bring down my -2, comma 3. They're both open, so it's parentheses, parentheses. All right, number 8. So again, add your 4 to both sides, divide by 3. I want you to go ahead and try this one. I know I just told you how to do it, but go ahead and try it on your own. Make sure you can do it. Press play when you're ready. All right, so we're going to add 4 to every part. So then I have -12 is less than or equal to 3x, which is less than or equal to 6. Divide everything by 3. So then I have -4 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 2. I'm going to go ahead and graph this. So on my -4, I'm going to have a closed circle because of the symbol. On my 2, I'm going to have a closed symbol. And then we draw a line to connect them. Then my interval notation is -4, comma 2. And then it's bracket and bracket because they are both closed circles. All right, so number 9, I'm going to go ahead and do this one with you because there's a fraction. So step 1 is to get rid of our +1 first. Pretend like that fraction's not there yet because it's multiplication, so we save that for last. So we're going to subtract 1 from everything. So then I have a -2 is less than 2/3 x, which is less than or equal to 4. So now, to get rid of this fraction here, remember, we are always multiplying by that reciprocal to get rid of the fraction, okay? So we're multiplying everything by 3/2 times 3/2 times 3/2. Multiplying by 3/2 is going to go ahead and eliminate that, so I am left with just x in the middle. And that's a positive we're multiplying by, so we keep the signs the same. And then 3/2 times a -2 is going to be a -3, because it's 3 times -2 is -6. -6 divided by 2 is a -3. Over here, 4 times 3, that is 12. 12 divided by 2 is 6. So now I can go ahead and graph, because I have that as simplified as I need it. -3, it is an open circle because of this sign. And then 6 is a closed circle because of this sign. And then draw my line to connect them because it's everything in between. And then for my interval notation, I've got -3, and I've got 6. Open circle means parentheses. Closed circle means a bracket. And then number 10, we're going to go ahead and distribute here. So 2 times x and 2 times -6 first. So -2 is less than 2x minus 12, less than or equal to 4. Now I can go ahead and solve, add 12 to all parts. Then I have 10 is less than 2x, which is less than or equal to 16. Divide by 2, this is positive, so everything stays the same sign-wise. So then I have 5 is less than x, which is less than or equal to 8. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put an open circle on 5 because of the sign, and a closed circle on 8 because of this sign. And then draw my line. And then we have 5 and 8. Open circle on 5 means parentheses. Closed circle on 8 means bracket.